Welcome back, everyone. So glad you're here with us today. I'm Elsie.
And I'm Evelyn. And honestly, today's topic, I feel like it's one of those things that nobody really wants to admit hits close to home, but it does for almost everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to put it. Because today we're talking about something that I would call one of the most quietly devastating things a human being can do to themselves. And it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It doesn't look like a breakdown or a blow up. It looks like silence or a cold shoulder or picking a random fight about something completely insignificant.
Right. Like someone who loves you is standing right in front of you, hand outstretched, and instead of taking it, you walk away. Or worse, you snap at them.
Exactly. And today we're unpacking why. We're diving deep into what's called the vulnerability paradox, which is essentially this: the very thing we need the most as human beings, to be truly seen and truly loved, is also the very thing that terrifies us the most.
And I think what makes this so interesting is that it's not something people do consciously. Nobody wakes up and thinks, you know what, I'm going to ruin this perfectly good relationship today. It's so much more subtle than that.
So much more. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning because to understand why we push people away, we first have to understand something fundamental about who we are as human beings.
Lay it on us.
Okay, so we are wired for connection. I mean this in a very literal biological sense. Human beings survived for thousands of years not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we worked together. We formed tribes, we bonded, we cared for each other. Connection is not just a nice to have, it's baked into our DNA.
And yet, here's the contradiction. That same brain that craves connection also has this incredibly ancient alarm system, the amygdala, and its whole job is to detect threats and keep you safe.
And the problem, the very heart of this whole paradox, is that to the amygdala, emotional vulnerability feels exactly like physical danger. Like your nervous system literally cannot tell the difference between a lion charging at you and the possibility of being emotionally rejected by someone you love.
That's actually kind of wild when you think about it. Like, your brain is treating this person might not love me back the same way it treats this person might eat me.
Exactly. And so what happens? When love gets close, when intimacy starts to deepen, the stakes rise. And the moment the stakes rise, your primitive brain kicks in and goes, danger, protect yourself. And so you pull back, you push them away.
So, it's not a character flaw, it's actually a survival reflex that's misfiring.
A survival reflex that is completely misfiring in the context of modern love and relationships, yes.
Okay, so let's talk about how people push others away. Because I think most of us, if we're honest, don't even recognize when we're doing it. What does it actually look like?
So this is where it gets really interesting and maybe uncomfortable because the ways we distance ourselves are rarely obvious. They're cloaked in things that actually look reasonable on the surface.
Like what?
Okay, so one of the most common ones is what I'd call hyper-independence. This is the person who has convinced themselves that needing someone is a sign of weakness. Their whole identity is built around, I can handle it, I don't need anyone. They shut their partner out of their struggles, their emotions, their daily inner world, and it looks strong from the outside.
But on the inside, it's loneliness dressed up as self sufficiency.
Exactly. They've essentially built a fortress around themselves where they're the only resident, safe but utterly alone.
And then there's the criticism thing, right? This one I think is really sneaky.
Oh, this one is so sneaky. So what happens is someone gets close and suddenly you become hyper-focused on everything that's wrong with them, like the way they chew, or the fact that they always leave cabinet doors open, or the tone they use when they're talking to their mom on the phone.
Things that never bothered you before.
things that never bothered you before. And what's actually happening is you're building a case. You're creating a justifiable reason to emotionally withdraw. If you can convince yourself they're not good enough for you, then you don't have to take the terrifying leap into actual intimacy.
And sometimes people turn that perfectionism inward, right? They don't criticize the other person, they criticize themselves. Like, I'm not good enough for them. Once they really see me, they'll leave.
Which is just as destructive, because then you retreat in shame before they even get the chance to know you. You rob both of you of something real.
And then there's anger, which I think deserves its own moment here.
Yes. So here's the thing about anger. It's a sharp emotion. It creates immediate, clear-cut distance. And for someone who's terrified of vulnerability, that closeness, that softening that intimacy requires, feels like free falling, no parachute.
So, picking a fight is a way to get back on solid ground.
It's a way to feel in control again. Anger says, I know where I stand. I know what's happening. I'm the one in charge here. Whereas vulnerability says, I don't know what's going to happen, and I can't control it.
And that is way scarier than any argument.
Way scarier. Which brings us to what I think is the most heartbreaking mechanism of all, the preemptive strike.
Oh man. Okay, explain this for people who might not be familiar.
So the preemptive strike is when someone sabotages a relationship before it can go wrong. And the internal logic, twisted by fear, goes something like this. If I let you truly in, eventually you'll see all my flaws. You'll stop loving me and you'll leave, and that will destroy me. So I will orchestrate the ending now, on my terms.
I will leave you before you can leave me.
I will leave you before you can leave me. And it sounds irrational from the outside, but from the inside, it makes a terrible kind of sense. Because if you sabotage the relationship, at least the ending is one you caused. You're in the driver's seat of your own heartbreak.
You trade the possibility of something beautiful for the certainty of something controlled.
A really tragic bargain. You exchange the warmth of real love for the cold comfort of absolute safety.
Okay, so where does all of this actually come from? Like, why do some people do this and others don't?
And this is where we have to look backward, because we are not born with this fear of intimacy. It is learned. And the framework that helps us understand this best is attachment theory.
Which, if you're not familiar, is essentially the idea that the patterns we develop in our adult relationships are directly shaped by our earliest experiences, specifically with our caregivers as children.
Right, so if you grew up in an environment where love felt conditional, where you only got affection when you performed well, or where emotional expression was dismissed or punished, you learned a very specific, very dangerous lesson.
Which is?
Connection is unstable, and vulnerability leads to pain.
So, by the time you're an adult, your nervous system is already wired to see love as a potential threat, rather than a safe harbor.
Exactly. And this plays out in two main ways. The first is what's called an avoidant attachment style. These are the people who, from a very young age, learned that relying on others leads to disappointment. So their coping mechanism was to become entirely self-reliant, to shut down their need for connection.
And in adulthood, when a partner tries to get close, even with the best intentions, their nervous system reads that as an intrusion, a threat to their autonomy that's kept them safe their whole lives.
They pull away, not because they don't care. Often it's quite the opposite, but because closeness itself triggers a deep alarm.
And then there's the anxious attachment style, which is almost the mirror image.
Yes, and this one is fascinating and painful because the anxiously attached person desperately craves intimacy. They want closeness more than almost anything, but underneath that craving is a core belief that they are fundamentally unworthy of love and that abandonment is just a matter of time.
So when the relationship is actually going well, when things are good, the anxiety spikes.
Because the brain says, this is too good to be true. Something is going to go wrong. I can feel it. And there's actually a term for this. The researcher Brené Brown calls it foreboding joy, this inability to fully experience happiness without simultaneously rehearsing the tragedy.
So sad. You can't even enjoy the good moments because you're too busy bracing for them to end.
And to relieve the unbearable tension of waiting for disaster, some people will subconsciously create the disaster. They push their partner away just to get the anticipated pain over with. It's like ripping off the bandage early.
Okay, we need to talk about the damage this leaves behind, because this doesn't just affect the person doing it.
No, the collateral damage of the vulnerability paradox is enormous. For the partner on the receiving end, it is deeply, deeply disorienting. You reach out with an open heart, you love this person, and you are met with an invisible wall of ice. You are punished for your love.
And you start to question yourself. What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Why isn't my love enough?
And over time, even the most patient, most devoted partners can only sustain that for so long. Eventually, they step back, they protect themselves, and in doing so, they fulfill the exact prophecy the other person feared all along.
They leave, which confirms the belief, see, I knew they'd go. I knew I wasn't enough.
And the saddest part? The greatest tragedy in all of this belongs to the person doing the pushing. They succeed in protecting themselves from the pain of rejection, but in doing so, they also inoculate themselves against the joy of true connection. They live in this heavily fortified castle, completely safe from the outside world,
But starving to death inside the walls.
but starving to death inside the walls. They carry this unbearable heaviness, a secret self that no one is ever allowed to see, and the shield they built to protect their heart becomes the very thing that breaks it.
Okay, so what do we do about it? Because I think what people really need to hear is there a way out?
There absolutely is a way forward, but I want to be honest, it's not as simple as just deciding to be more open. The walls went up over years. They don't come down in a day.
So where do you start?
You start with self-awareness. This is step one, and it's foundational. You have to become a student of your own fear. So the next time you feel that sudden urge to pull back, to start a fight, to go cold, to find fault with your partner, instead of just acting on it, you pause and you ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? What is this impulse really about?
Like, am I actually upset about the dishes? Or did something just happen between us that felt vulnerable and terrifying, and I'm trying to create distance?
Exactly. You can't lower a shield you don't even know you're holding. Awareness is how you learn to see it.
And then what?
And then you sit with the discomfort, which sounds simple but is genuinely one of the hardest things a person can do. Vulnerability is uncomfortable. It feels awkward. It feels terrifying. It goes against every instinct a nervous system wired for protection has. But breaking through the paradox requires building a tolerance for that discomfort.
Staying in the room, even when everything in you is screaming to run.
Physically and emotionally, you breathe through the panic of being seen. You trust that the intensity won't last forever. And slowly, you start to realize you can survive being vulnerable.
I love what you said before about micro-vulnerabilities. Can you talk about that?
Yes, because I think this is so important for people who feel like vulnerability has to mean this grand, dramatic, emotional confession. It doesn't. You can start incredibly small. A micro-vulnerability might be saying, my feelings were actually hurt when you said that, instead of going quiet and passive-aggressive. It might be admitting, I don't know the answer to this. It might be asking for a hug when you're sad instead of retreating to your room.
Small moments of honesty that build trust, both with the other person and with yourself.
Exactly. You're proving to your own nervous system, little by little, that being seen does not destroy you, that it is in fact survivable. And slowly, the drawbridge comes down a little more each time.
And I think you have to address that inner voice too, right? That inner critic who's been running the whole show.
The inner critic is the architect of isolation. It's the voice that whispers, if they really knew you, they'd leave. And we have to challenge that voice. We have to replace self-loathing with something that's actually true, that our flaws, our fears, our messiness are not disqualifiers. They are the things that make us human. They are the things that make real connection possible.
Because nobody actually connects with perfection. We connect with realness.
We connect with realness, always. That is where love actually lives.
Not in the polished version of ourselves we present to the world, but in the raw, imperfect, uncertain human underneath.
Okay, before we close, I want to zoom out and just sit with the bigger picture of this for a moment.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, loving someone is an act of radical courage. It is the highest stakes gamble there is. You are giving someone the power to devastate you, and there are no guarantees. People will disappoint us, misunderstandings will happen, hearts may be broken. That is just the truth of it.
But the alternative, a life lived in complete emotional isolation, is its own kind of devastation, just slower, quieter.
A slow spiritual death. And the vulnerability paradox is asking us in every moment of every relationship to make a choice, to feel the fear rising and to stay anyway, to drop the armor, to look at the person in front of us and say, I am terrified, but I am here.
That takes so much courage.
It takes everything. And yet, when we stop pushing, when we allow ourselves to finally be fully seen, flaws and fears and all, something extraordinary happens. The vulnerability that we thought would destroy us turns out to be the only thing that can actually save us. It's the only bridge to the intimacy, the peace, and the love we have been searching for our whole lives.
I think that's exactly the right note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. This one genuinely means a lot.
It really does. And if any part of this resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it.
Thank you for watching.
And before we go, we want to hear from you. What topic do you want us to dive into next? Drop it in the comments below. We read every single one.
See you in the next one.
Bye.